Welcome to the Pages of Light podcast, your destination for discussions of popular fantasy and science fiction novels from a Christian worldview. My name is Tyler, aka Verum, and with me today, as always, is Gabriel, aka the Quarantine Quartermaster. Welcome back to the podcast, Gabe. You ready for today's discussion?
I love me some Ender's Game. Let's get to it.
Yes, that's right. So today we're going to be doing part 2 of our Ender's Game discussion. We're going to do a little bit more discussion on Ender's time in battle school, talking a little bit about the different strategies he used in his different armies that he was a member in. And then we'll do some discussion on his time at the commander school, where he's doing the big simulations with the large full-scale fleets, and his time where he gets reunited with some of his friends from battle school. And then we'll do the end of the story as Ender defeats the buggers and gets to go to their old planets and stuff like that. And but to start off, we're going to talk about what's that? Oh, spoiler alert. But yeah, but to start off the discussion, we're going to look at Peter and Valentine and everything that's happening on Earth while Ender is up in the battle school learning how to be a commander. There's a little side story with those two characters as they kind of adopt these aliases or identities called Locke and I'm going to butcher Demosthenes. Why can't I remember that? Demosthenes. And so so basically Peter and Valentine realize that they're pretty smart kids, and so they decide that they want to have some kind of influence or power in the world, and they think that the only way that they can do this, because they're kids and not adults, is by hiding their identities essentially and writing these columns and articles and being present on internet forums and having a bunch of discussions with people about political matters and things going on with the wars and with the buggers and this all bunch of stuff with Russia and the Warsaw Pact and a bunch of different just political things, and they want to have influence over all of this stuff. So I don't know, did you have any just thoughts on just Peter and Valentine adopting these identities and just the idea? I kind of like the idea of on the internet you can be anybody, which is which bears itself out in today's world as well. And this was written in 1985, so I don't think there was the internet in 1985, and so that's some good foreshadowing and some good science fiction predictions for what was gonna come in the future.
Yeah, so agreed. I really want to see the future where you could have true anonymity. That's the kind of picture that Orson Scott Card paints, is that when they were on, it was undetectable. At the end of the book, we learned that only 6 people know that Locke and Demosthenes are Peter Wiggin and Valentine Wiggin. And this is, mostly Peter's venture. He wants to have influence, and he kind of coerces Valentine into being Demosthenes, who is kind of the rebel rouser, and Locke is the more of the enlightened person and speaking to the intelligentsia of the world. Mm-hmm. So they have 2 different followings, where Demosthenes is supposed to be inciting people's passions and getting them riled up about the government, and Locke is supposed to be the voice of reason, and it all comes out of Peter's head and his plan. But yeah, so first of all, I thought it was really good the way that they were anonymous, and the whole plan is that the older and older that they get, the more power that they're going to have, because they've already built it up. And then we learned that Peter's big plan is to, Ender is the Wiggin. They refer to him as the Wiggin. And Peter and Valentine are Wiggins 1 and Wiggin, the second Wiggin. So, and they are all blessed with this high IQ, which we talked about in the first episode. And this is actually kind of the first time in my life, I kind of mentioned this when I was that I was reading this in college, and kind of the geopolitical like how there's different parts of the world and they all believe that it should be, the world should operate in a certain way. And I never really like wrap my head around like politics and geography until Ender's Game, and I kind of read this, and I also read one of the next books, which is the kind of like what happens after like the battle students go back to Earth, and there's a different villain, and his name is Ashiel. But yeah, I really like the way Orson Scott Card brings them in to be commentators and how they gain this like big political following. So that kind of helped me open my mind to how to think about things in a larger systems format. Like, there's different belief systems in different parts of the world. So I appreciate that part of it. What about you, Tyler? What did you think?
Yeah, I think I enjoyed like hearing the two Valentine and Peter's discussions about like how they want to write the characters, and like they're not even, it's not that they believe what they're writing, it's like they're writing the characters to achieve a certain specific end. And I just think is interesting that they are just doing this to gain power, and they're not like, it's almost like they're not even doing it for themselves, because they can't like assume the identity. Like they can't be the ones that are actually in power. It's just like these made up people that they conjured out of their mind, probably influenced by other political philosophies of history. But like they can't actually be the ones in power until the very end. Like Peter does actually get real power in the end, but on the lead up to all of it, they can't actually take any of the credit for what they're doing. So it's a lot of like delayed gratification, and just like knowing in your head that you're the one who's actually in control, and not actually seeing like getting all of the fruit and the benefit from it. I don't know. I think I also enjoyed the the one thing I really loved was whenever their father was starting to quote Demosthenes, and they're like, like, why are you quoting Demosthenes? Like, we're supposed to like write him.
Valentine did not like that.
Yeah, she was like, I hate this about. I don't know if she like. Did she like have, was she against her father? Like,
I mean, she was more enlightened, and she would have more like thought along the lines of Locke, but she's writing Demosthenes, and she's like picking up these threads and like the, in the like. the zeitgeist, what the people are thinking about, and she's picking up on them, and she's trying to get them riled up. And her father is one of the ones, and she was just like hoping that he would be better than that he wouldn't fall into like the arguments that Demosthenes made. And so she ended up being disappointed in her father because of that.
Yeah, so I enjoyed that it was like they wanted people to like get involved in all of the writings, but they didn't want they were surprised that their dad did it. I guess I don't know why they'd be surprised, but because that was like what they were trying to do. But maybe she was just like disappointed that her father would fall into the traps of whatever the political ideologies were of Demosthenes. So
yeah, and you almost think of that like the way of the world, as Christians, we're trying to be enlightened and walk in the ways of the Lord. And, it's very easy to get, because a lot of human motivation comes from like wanting something or, feeling a sense of outrage that something isn't the way that you wanted it to be. And it's like, we're always locked in this battle of like, I was raised in the world, I was born of the world, and the world teaches me that, these things are good and these things are bad. And we have to like try and, look to the Bible for the way to live our life.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the thought that came to my mind when I think about Locke and Demosthenes.
Yeah. There was one quote that I liked. I think it was Peter who said it whenever he was trying to convince Valentine to like join him in this kind of plot and this like scheme that he was trying to do with the writings. and he was saying something about how in times of like crisis or in times of like a lot of political tension, it's people that have like the right words that can really make a difference, and people who say the right things and can really sway people. And like it just goes back to like the power of the word. I think we were talking about that in one of the previous episodes on like words have power. I don't remember. I think it was with Emperor's Soul that we were talking about that. And
definitely.
So yeah, I just like that it's like Peter was like the violent kind of conniving kind of person and using his power, like physical power to
and
overpower people.
And the kid like dissecting animals in the forest.
Oh yeah, dissecting animals.
Like,
but then he was able to just use his intellect and his mind to gain influence instead of doing it through like physical violence. And he had one of the quotes that he was talking about was like, Hitler came to power by like using his words and by getting the love of the people essentially to get his power. He didn't come out and just like start doing political violence at the very beginning. He had to win the people's trust. He had to say the right things, and he had to make it seem like he was doing things for the right reasons and trying to make the country a better place before he could do all the other things that he did. I don't think Peter turns out to be a Hitler, but that was like his rationale.
He turns into a hegemon.
Yeah.
Yep.
But he wasn't like a genocidal person, at least not in this story. He wasn't. I don't know what happens in any of the other books, but
yeah, I don't know either how he plays out as the hegemon.
Yeah. Yeah, but I just like the words have power, and that just kind of goes back to like the biblical stories where like the word of God has power, and like our words have power, and the things that we say influence people around us, and the things that we say also influence how people perceive Christianity if we make it known that we are Christians. And so it just is a reminder for us that the things we say matter, and they can have influence for good or influence for bad in the world.
Yeah, and they even say it in one of the Gospels that your mouth is kind of like a fountain, and you can either give life to people or you can take life away from people. And it's always better to be feeding people's soul and to nurture them. That's what God wants us to do, and versus being the person who's always complaining all the time and bringing down the mood of the group. If you're around people who complain all the time, those are toxic people. Those are not people that will bring you light and joy and happiness, because they can focus on are the things that are going on around them that they don't agree with and that they don't see as right. And that's the opposite of humility. And those are also the type of people who could never be happy for someone for getting something. They would look at those things as like a slight. And I think we're called never to gossip around people.
Yep.
It's all about, Tyler, I think you said it was about the heart. When we talk about people, like where is our heart when we're discussing things? Is this a conversation I need to vent and get things out, or is it like, well, I vented 20 minutes ago, but I'm still talking about the same problem or the same thing? That's not going to bring about anything productive.
Yeah. I think one last thing with the Locke and Demosthenes section is just the power of like ideologies and people following ideologies, because it wasn't that they like people like the Locke and Demosthenes, like their ideologies were, and their words are why people followed them. It wasn't because of who they were as people, because they didn't know who they were as people. They just knew what they were saying in their columns and what they were talking about with what they thought and what they believed. And that like definitely plays itself out in like our world today. Like people, they do follow individuals, but they also just follow ideologies. And like you can go with like things like communism or socialism or I don't know, what's an example on the right? Like, I don't even know, like Christian, like nationalism or stuff like that, where it's like like you can just get wrapped into like these ideologies and really have tunnel vision on what the ideology is, instead of like trying to think independently about situations, and instead of just like trying to reason and think for yourself. It's more of just like, what does the ideology say, instead of like, what do I think, or what does the Bible say, or any of those kind of things. You just get like wrapped around the axle on whatever this person wrote like hundreds of years ago, and you're less focused on what you believe, and you're more focused on what the ideology says you should believe, instead of believing something for yourself.
Right. And taking the time to be, if we're pursuing Christ, are we taking time to look at the Bible and seeing what the Word says? Because the Word is truth, and the Word comes from God. Taking that time to do the self-exploration, and instead of looking to the ideology, like, let's look to God and ask God what He thinks we should do in a given situation.
Yeah, definitely. So now let's move to the next topic for this episode. We're just going to talk a little bit about Ender's time in the battle school. We talked a little bit about it during the last episode with some of the things that happened during his time there, but I think we wanted to talk a little bit more specifically in this episode about some of the different strategies that he used within the different battles that he was in. So I don't know if we really have a lot of strategy for like the launch army. Or like, it wasn't really a launch army. It was more of like his launchies group, where there was like a lot of training. But I think we really only get the true kind of strategy kind of stuff coming out whenever he gets to become an actual soldier in Salamander. Although he doesn't really get used a lot in Salamander because of, who was that? Bonzo? Was that with Salamander?
Bonzo Madrid.
Yeah.
Yep. And we talked about his pride and how that kept him from using a resource that God had given him, and he just kind of like was like, I'm not going to use you, and it was all out of pride, and it turned out not to be good for him.
I don't know, what did you think of just him in the launchies group and him trying to like learn things really quickly? I liked how him and Eli kind of started like this little friendship the first time they were in I don't know what you call it, like the battle room or whatever, where all where the no gravity is, and they're kind of bouncing things off of each other and figuring out how to do things quickly, where a lot of the other kids are just kind of like floating around in space and like not doing anything.
That was I think that was the point of the whole launchy group. So it was to explain the battle room. So for those of you who have not read the book, the battle room is a cube, and in one side of the cube, like on the right side, there's a hole in the middle where the soldiers will come in. There's 40 people per army, and they have different names like Rat, Phoenix,
Rabbit.
What are some of the other ones? Yep. And then the other side is where the other 40 kids come into the room, and then sometimes they have obstacles in the room, and they're called stars. And to me, it sounded like they were big floating cardboard things, but they were immobile, like they like wherever they were stationed in the room is where they would stay. And then they also had and then the winning ceremony is when if you've defeated the other team, you need to have 5 people to win the actual game. So you have to have 4 people touch their helmets to the corner of the enemy's gate. And Ender has this big thing of saying he orients himself downwards towards the gate. And I love that idea that he figures out the gravity orientation. Like, I'm going to fall towards the enemy's gate, and that's always going to be my perspective. And then the 5th person travels through the open gate to complete the victory. And so we just follow. So the launchy thing is all about figuring out, they have flash shoots, and if you shoot your gun at an opposing enemy, like that part of the flash suit will freeze. And if you get hit on the non-critical parts of the body, aka arm or leg, that part will freeze. But when you get hit in the chest, that's when like you will actually become deactivated as a soldier, and you can no longer shoot. And then some more like finer details is that when you do get flashed, like that part of your suit goes dead. And it doesn't reflect as much light. And in the battle room, there's different like levels of light. Like it could be a dark or a light room. It could be like a dusk setting where there's a little bit of light. And then you have the stars. And so Ender uses all of his tactical know-how to kind of gain the advantage in any situation. He reads the room. He looks at the stars. He's like, we need to control that star in the corner. We need to control, we need to move along these walls because that's where the enemy is, and we need to get behind them. And basically becomes the ultimate strategist. And what we learn in Salamander Army is that the battle school is all about formations and how we're going to have... And it's all about that military regiment. Like, you have a position, you're supposed to be there. Stop thinking for yourself. Just go to where I tell you to be, and then do what I tell you to do. Yep. And Ender doesn't do that. Do you kind of want to describe Ender's like approach to the battle room and his way he sets up the dragon army?
Oh yeah, so like in Salamander, you learn about the formations, and so like throughout the whole time, they're always involved in these formations. And then whenever he becomes a commander of Dragon Army, he's like, no formations. We're not doing any formations. And he takes all of the stuff that he has learned, and he just throws it out the window. He like builds a new system from the ground up. Whenever I was in college, I took a class on classical music. It was part of like my humanities core, and I had to do a class on like the history of Western music and stuff. And one of the things I learned in that class was that like the great composers, they had to learn all of the basics and all of the foundations of the music like before they could break the rules. So like a lot of Beethoven's symphonies are really impactful because he subverts your expectations about what you think should happen in the piece of music, but he does something different than what is typically done in a normal situation. So like,
interesting.
So like, for example, a sonata allegro form is like a style of music and like how to write music. And so like you can write those types of music, or you can do something that's different than sonata allegro form, or you can do like half sonata allegro form and then do something different halfway into the piece and change it up so it's different and more interesting. And so I think like my takeaway from that was that in order to break the rules properly, you have to know what the rules are to begin with, so that you can break the rules in a way that is going to be impactful and is going to be something that like people remember, instead of just like, because if you just do like willy-nilly like random notes and stuff, like it's not going to make any sense and people aren't going to like it. But if you have like, you understand how the rules should be, and then you break them in a way that is interesting and or like is better than it was before, then it's something that's going to be truly great and going to last the test of time. And you see that with Ender as well. Like he knew all of the rules going through, and he learned all the stuff from all of his other teachers, and then he comes to being a commander, and he can break all of the rules in a way that is really impactful because he knew everything beforehand. So he knew how to pick it apart and change it and become a better commander. So
yeah, when he was under Bonzo, he was, they described him in the practice room like he was forbidden to practice. And so he was just observing, and they're like, he was basically dissecting Bonzo's like approach to formations, and he was looking at it like an enemy commander. How he constantly says, how can I disrupt this formation? So yeah, that's very much like what you were saying. But yeah, Ender does have some good teachers along the way.
Yes.
Going back to what you were saying, like how you kind of need to learn the basics. So he learned the basics of shooting from Petra. Petra is the only female student that we hear of in the book, and she teaches Ender how to shoot. And she describes to him that you need to keep the flash on the person for just like a third of a second, maybe not like a whole second, but it's not like you can just like zap them once and they're done. She's like, you have to focus in and you have to like really concentrate if you're going for that long distance shooting. So he like understood like that part of it. And then he works with Dink Meeker when he gets transferred to Rat Army, and Rat Army is winning. They're in second place, and Dink is a guy who was trying to be advanced in the battle school, but he kept refusing to be a commander. So what he does is he just takes on being a toon leader within Rat Army, and it's actually described as like two different armies. Like Dink has his army of like 10 people, and Rat Army is the rest of the people. And Dink requests Ender, and he was picked up because Ender's running all these launchy sessions. He's practicing stuff with, and he's becoming, forming an elite group of launchies. And Dink kind of trains him like how to act in the formation, like what you should be doing, and like you said, Tyler, like that's another piece. So like the individual piece was, I need to be able to shoot, I need to be good at what I do, and then it's bumped up with Dink into the small tactics, like how can I make my tune successful, and then he's moved into Dragon Army, which he's given 40 kids, and he's not allowed to trade any of them. He's given what he's given, and then he's taken what he's learned with like Petra and Dink, and now he's saying, I have a whole army. I need to train them to be like me. They need to be good at shooting. They need to be good at working in small groups. But what Ender does, which is so cool and so much better, is he says, he relinquishes control, which is like another way of humility, like saying, like, I have chosen people to be my tune leaders, and they have seconds, and like I can trust them. And what you see in Bonzo is he has no trust. He does not expect his army to do anything amazing. He just says, you better be where I told you to be, or you're going to be in trouble. And Ender's army is not like that. He says, I've created these tunes, and I'm going to give them autonomy. I'm going to give them an idea of what to do, and I'm going to send them out, and they're going to do amazing things. And, Mazer Rackham talks about that at the end of the book, that we, spoiler, we're going to talk about the buggers. The buggers have a hive mind, and like one person makes the decision, and they all act in unison to fill that decisions. And what Mazer says is, as human beings, we have individual people who are talented and useful, and you can use you can overwhelm the buggers because you have like 6 people making decisions versus like one person. And if 6 people versus one person in that kind of like a battle or exchange, like you're going to have, if you have 6 intelligent people versus one really intelligent person, they're going to be able to make decisions for their little pocket of the war so that they win like the entire or the little pocket of the battle so that they can win the whole thing.
Yeah, I loved you talking about like the different like levels of, so you have like soldier, squad leader, commander, and then like full fleet commander. So like Ender goes through all the little stages of like being a leader in some way. And I love what you said about like how Bonzo doesn't, like, he wants all the power for himself, and he doesn't trust anybody else to like make decisions. But like the important thing that Ender learns is that if you have to trust your other like leaders and your other squad people to make their own decisions, or else like they're never gonna like take ownership of what they're doing. So like you have to give them like the freedom to make decisions. And if they have the freedom to do that, then they're going to try their best and be the best that they can be. If you're always like pushing them under your thumb of power, like they're never going to like try anything new or think outside the box or just, do anything that could like disrupt the way that things are already done. So there's always just like, you must do the thing that I said, and the way I said it, and any other way is not good. So there's no room for creativity, and there's no room for discovering new things about how to shoot people, or how to like be defensive, or how to like get to the gate down, so there's just no room
and
for, like,
and as a person who has been micromanaged in my life, that is a way to debilitate someone. And to so I have read a book called Boundaries in Leadership by Townsend and Cloud. And they say, if you want if you're leading people, give them control. They say people crave control. And that is a form of trust, saying like, I've given you this responsibility, and like you said, like we want you to run with it and be creative. But as soon and there was another thing I was listening to, and I forget where I heard it, but if like you should tell people what they need to do, but you shouldn't be controlling about how they do it. And that was the thing. Like if I was just given tasks to do, in that job, like I could accomplish them, but I was required to do them in a way that was like against my way of thinking, and it was hard for me, and I couldn't always, do it the right way. But that did cause a lot of growth, and God does say that we should listen to our bosses and follow them. So that's what I did, and it grew me. But it was very tough. I actually got shingles at one point because I had that psychosomatic reaction to the amount of stress that I was under. Not fun. Don't recommend it. But on the other side of things, I have been developed a lot. So I am thankful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing, like you said, like whenever you do things yourself, you force yourself to learn. So like you may like do something one way and you're like, oh, that wasn't the optimal way to do it. I could have done it another way, or I see a way that I could have done it that would maybe have been more efficient, or I would have got a better end result than what I did beforehand. So yeah, there's a lot of like benefits to like giving people ownership of their own like job and their own what they're supposed to be responsible for. That way they take risks and they try to make things as good as they can possibly be, because nobody like wants to just be inefficient just to be inefficient. Like nobody's like, I want to take as long as I possibly can to do X task, so I'm just like wasting my time. Like
I've known a person that I think that is actually like that, because I think they consider it job security.
Okay, well,
sorry, I just had to throw that in.
There
are some weird psychologies out there.
Yeah, there's exceptions to every rule, but I think we had an example of this as well in Elantris, whenever Serene tells what's the little posse they were in, the little group that she was a part of to overthrow the king. She was telling them that have their servants take ownership of different pieces of land, so that they'd be able to take a portion of what they made back to their home. I do remember that now
that you said it.
So that was like an example of like giving people who work for you ownership of different portions of the business, and then like giving them an incentive to be as good as they possibly can, so that, like she said, they can take a percentage of what they farmed out of the ground and they could keep it instead of giving it to the Lord or whoever it was. So that's like an incentive to have them find the most efficient way and the most effective way to do whatever job it is that they have. And Ender does that really good in Dragon Army. He gives all of his squadron or toon leaders like the autonomy to do things.
Toon leaders, and then he also squadron when he goes to command school.
Yeah, toon leaders. So he also doesn't, like sometimes he would just not even come to practice. He would let his toon leaders run practice, and he would go and study film of the wars in the previous years. So like he was
the Bugger Wars.
Yeah, so he was empowering his toon leaders to become almost like little mini commanders. So he was giving them that responsibility so they could become better leaders, while he was still improving his own self as a large scale commander by studying like the actual wars that had happened previously. There's just a lot of really cool, interesting things within this book, like on how to just like be a good leader and how to delegate tasks to people and how to empower people to do better and all of these different things. There's just so many little like nuances and stuff. Like he had like that secret special group that was like, okay, these 5 people, you're going to be like my super special squad. And whenever I need to do something insane,
Bean's group. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like he has Bean be this leader of like this super insane, like a, what'd you call it? Like Delta Squad or something, like the elite.
Yeah. Like special ops.
Special ops.
Like they're going to, yeah. So at one point, like Bean, they're being outnumbered. I think it's in the battle. So the teachers, we talked about this in the last podcast, the teachers had planned this progression for Ender to take him from a normal battle, like one army, Ender's 40 kids in Dragon Army versus the other army, and then they like create this progression, and it's not like a normal progression. So normally they have 3 months to prepare. Ender gets 3.5 weeks. He goes into battle, and then he's having multiple battles a day. There's times when the battle room is so full of stars, and then on top of that, they're being so full of stars, the enemies actually unfreeze, which is a new part in the game.
Yep.
And then there's they get late notification, and Ender comes into a room that's already, this is Bonzo's army, so this is Salamander, where they're already in there, and they're around the gate where Ender's army is about to come out. So if Ender's army comes out, they're going to get slaughtered because there's just 40 people ready to shoot at them. And Ender figures out this way to turn his army into armored tanks. Yeah, he puts
like
Crazy Tom. Yeah, he puts Crazy Tom and Bean together, the tallest and the smallest, and Bean is given both guns, and he's like, gets thrown out in there, and Bean's like shooting all of them, and they just had a team hoisting people into the room, and they still won that battle, which was really cool.
It's because they were all sitting ducks. They were just standing there waiting, and they didn't have any they're just there's no cover for them, and they got wasted.
They got wasted. Yeah.
He had to fight two armies at once one time.
Yep. And then that's building for the ultimate battle. So at that point, they just went directly for the gate. They said, there's no way that we can, beat these two armies at once.
Yes.
So we're going to make a bold move, and we're just going to go straight for the gate. And they touch their 4 helmets, and then they go through. And they made some crazy formation to do that. Basically, I think of a matrix of kids with the payload, with the the people who are going to go.
It was
through
a little shield, and they all kind of huddled together and went through the room.
Yeah. But I love some of the descriptions that they have. They were wall sliding, and they were getting behind people, and that was really cool. And that all leads up to Ender getting into battle school. So after
command school.
Ender has these command school. Sorry, that's what I meant to say. And he has all these crazy battles, and then he's basically burned out. In the last battle, he's just he sees he's outnumbered, and he still figures it out. And he's kind of broken for a few months, and he goes back to Earth. And then he gets sent to Eros, which is a planet that's been blacked out by the buggers in the second or first war. And
I remember.
That's where all the buggers' secrets are held. They learned about blacking out planets to absorb energy, and they also the buggers played with gravity there, and that's how they were able to make the battle rooms the way that they were. Because they're supposedly when the kids enter the gate, there's supposed to be some centripetal force around that field where it goes from normal gravity in the hallway to the zero gravity in the battle room. But they had a way to make a force field, so it was as soon as you cross this line, you're in null gravity, and that was beyond human capabilities before they discovered the buggers. So what did you think about the introduction of, I think it's Shem Rajnagar, the leader of command school, and he talks to Graf about Graf bringing Ender to command school, and they have this big long flight on a ship, and then they tell that captain of that ship that he has to live on Eros until the end of the war. He's not happy.
I think it was the pilot. The pilot, he was like, "You have to stay here from now on."
Oh yeah,
yeah. He was not very happy about that. I don't really remember a ton about that guy. I don't think because
Oh yeah, well he was just the commander of the battle school. I think he had one part in it.
We don't get information about him like we did with Graf. With Graf, we got all the behind the scenes, him talking to all the different commanders about what was going on at the battle school and what he was trying to get Ender to do. We don't really get any of that with the commander of the leader of the commander school. I don't know what his title was, but yeah, I think I liked the command school because he got to have the reuniting of all of his friends and all of the best soldiers from battle school. So I thought that was a really good kind of he was so spent and pushed to such limits in the battle school that it was good for him to here's all of the people that I poured into, all of the people that I taught and I like made them better soldiers, or all
and
the people that
basically
poured
he
into
trusted.
me. And like all of these people are now coming back together, and they're like essentially the best of the best, and they're all the best squadrons or all the best soldiers. And he gets to lead all of these now people in these computer simulations, and then ones that turn out to be actual real battles. So yeah, I think I just like that kind of reuniting of all of those different characters that we got to see throughout the story. It was a good feel good moment for me.
Yeah, it was definitely fun to see them all come back together. And Eli goes, Salam, I think, is the first thing he says, at peace. But yeah, so just a little bit about command school. So we learn on the track to Eros that there's a technology called the Ansible, which is basically instantaneous communication. And they tell Ender about that. And what we learn is that the squadrons that have left Earth after the second invasion and go to the buggers' home planets, we actually can see their locations, and they're transmitting data back to Eros, the IF command center. And they have real-time... they have 5 of these simulators, which the ships are dots of light, and Ender's can move around the battle. He can reposition himself. He can look at different things from different angles, and he learns it again, Tyler, like you said, like ground up. He was able to fly with one of the old ships, and then he was learning to fly with 2 of those ships, and then he was 4, and then he was commanding squadrons, and then he was commanding a whole army. So again, we have that progression of him learning the individual parts so that he can conduct the whole symphony. He had to learn how each little part worked, so that he can figure out a way to win. And so the Ansible makes it possible. And so at this point in the book, he's training on the simulator, and then like we said, when he asks Graf, does the does it get any harder? He can play the simulator on 15 different levels. Graf says, "Oh, well, I'll look into that." And then that's when Graf goes away, and Mazer Rackham comes in, and they have their little battle in the room. And that is when Ender actually begins commanding the Earth squadron that left after the Second War, and they are fighting the buggers in real time across time and space. And they have a weapon called Doctor Device, or Molecular something device. MD device became Doctor Device. And basically, I love the way Mazer describes it. He was like, nuclear weapons were so weak that they could be used on Earth. You could never use Doctor Device on Earth, because basically what it does is it creates a field where atoms break apart, and if they it's like a contagion. If those molecules spread to other molecules, then
it's like a chain reaction.
Becoming this, it's a chain reaction, bigger and bigger and bigger. And so any matter, because space is a void, so the ships were matter, and if they were clustered close together, Ender could blow them all up in one shot, which is what he does in the first battle with the real buggers. And then there's this progression of different battles, and they keep getting harder and harder. And Ender the whole time thinks it's Mazer fighting against him. He's like, "Mazer, you're reading my mind." And this is also when Ender starts having bad dreams and starts not sleeping well, and he keeps reliving his worst memories. And he can't get past that, and he's always like, "Am I awake? Am I sleeping?" And that's kind of the progression for command school. Any other thoughts on command school there?
I think it was harder in a different sense than Battle School was, because Battle School I think was physically exhausting for him, because he was always in the battles and always 2 battles at the same time, or in one day, and all this different stuff. But I think Commander School was more mentally and emotionally draining because of the amount of hours that the battles took. Because I think at one point it said something like this battle took 10 hours or something insane like that, where it's the amount of mental fortitude you have to perform at a high level for that length of time is just insane. Because who can be at the height of in the peak of their mental prowess for that long? Most people can't even do that for a few hours, and he has to do this for 5, 6, 7, 10 hours and, you know, still be like the best commander in the history of the world and still beat the buggers who are, you know, and they still learn from their mistakes, right? Like they didn't make the mistake of clumping all their ships together again because he did it in the first battle. Like they knew like, oh, we're not going to do that again. So like the buggers are always learning, so he always has to think of new ideas and how to beat them. And yeah, it's just like emotionally draining because he always tries to like be the best. Like he tries to lose the least amount of ships, but he realizes he can't win if he tries to always just like conserve his ships. Like sometimes he has to sacrifice ships to accomplish some kind of victory that he needs to do. So yeah, there's just a lot of like mental wearing on him that is really
and not to mention that Mazer is like giving him a hard time after every battle, because Mazer actually like he knows people on those ships. We don't know that, you know, at the beginning, but like when he got up to his relativistic speed for 50 years to come back to be Ender's, you know, mentor, only 8 years passed in a normal timeline. Well, those people have been traveling across the galaxy, so every time he loses a ship, Mazer is like, you cannot do that. You must not lose ships. And yeah, they just put him under an incredible mental strain.
Yeah, which it's hard for him to lose ships too because they have a finite amount of ships. But he doesn't really know that because he thinks it's like a computer simulation. So to his mind, he's like, oh, well, I can just sacrifice ships because it's not real ships, right? So there's like that.
That was the whole point, is that they were training him to make those decisions. Yep. And they said at the end, you know, Ender, you had to be the perfect weapon. We aimed you, we pointed you at the enemy, but you could never know because you couldn't do it if you knew. And we know that Ender has empathy and he has a big heart. Yep. And if he had known he was going to basically commit genocide and wipe out an entire species, even if they were hostile, I don't think he would have done it.
No, he wouldn't have done it.
Yeah. That wouldn't have been an Ender's character.
Yeah. So speaking of that, he gets to like the final battle, right? And he's like, I think they said it was like 10,000 to 1 or like 1,000 to 1 in his odds. Like the ship
like
counts.
1,000 to 1.
Yeah. So like he's on like these massive, crazy odds, and which is crazy because you basically get that exact same scenario when he's in Dragon Army and they put 2 armies against him. And he has to make like this mad dash. He's like, I basically just have to go for the goal and the objective. I can't worry about any of the soldiers I'm going to lose. I can't worry about anything that's going to be collateral damage. My sole objective is to defeat this, to get to the very center and the big prize at the very middle in the home world. And so like he gets to reuse like a situation that he had previously had in battle school, and he gets to reuse it in a real life and real battle. Of course, the stakes are like infinitely higher in the real battle because it's real people that are dying, and it's real enemies that are dying, the queens of the buggers, who are actually sentient creatures that he's murdering essentially. But yeah, it's just like the stakes are insanely high.
Yeah, and then also there's a scene in Battle School when he first gets Dragon Army, and he asks, what is our attack position? And Bean flips off the wall, and then all the other kids are like doing the same thing. And he said, you know, like, there may be a time in my future when I need a complete, like, unbalancing attack against an enemy force that could be useful. And that is also a thing that he deploys. So he's got his, like, core of ships. And he said, like, the buggers, like, have learned to respect me. So they allow... So with humans, the objective in all the other missions were to make sure that we had as many people alive at the end. And at this mission, like... he said that like the buggers kind of defeated themselves because they believed that whatever, you know, humans did, they must have a way out. And they did not realize that in certain times that humans will sacrifice themselves for a greater good. And I'm kind of getting chills right now because like I'm thinking about how God, came as the sacrifice for our imperfections and took that upon himself. And like that's what we're called to do. And the men and women on those ships that have crossed the universe and have found their way to the bugger world, and they have to go in and do this amazing thing. And then Ender uses his knowledge from the previous games, like you said. He makes this formation, like basically like this cylinder of ships, and then they all spread out and they start attacking, and then they recollect, and there's only like 12 of them, but they're on the other side and they're closer towards the planet, and then they just make a mad dash for the planet, and then in the final battle they unleash Dr. Device against the planet, and at first there's nothing, and then the surface of the bugger planet starts to bubble and boil, and it just becomes this huge explosion, taking out all of the bugger ships. Remember, it was like 1,000 to 1 ships. And Ender, he rehearsed in his mind. He was like, I thought they were playing unfair when they sent me in against two armies at once. But those were the actual odds. And the enemy is always stronger than you are, is I think what Mazer would say. Yeah, and then once that happens, there's a big celebration. People are excited, and everyone's celebrating. And Ender is just like, what's going on? I feel like I played a dirty trick and I won in a cheap way. Why is everyone?
Well, he thought it was like his like final test or whatever.
Oh yeah, that's right.
He didn't think it was like a He just thought it was like, oh, everyone's here to watch me to make sure I pass my test or whatever. But turns out it was a little bit more important than a final test.
Yeah. I did find it a little convenient that every bugger had returned to the bugger home world. That is the one part of the sci-fi that stuff. Yeah. That was the one part I was like, so the buggers have spread across galaxies, like they are Earth, like planet harvesters. Yeah. So,
but how would they know that how would they know that all the buggers came back? Huh?
Yeah,
some buggers are still out there. Remember?
Yep.
So, whenever they described the planet exploding, I thought about. I don't know if you watched the Marvel show Loki on Disney Plus.
I did, yeah.
You did? Okay, so yeah, there's that scene whenever they go to that planet, Loki and Sylvie, and they're trying to get off on that ship, and the whole moon explodes or whatever. You remember that scene?
Oh yeah.
That's what I kind of pictured their planet doing, is like just splitting in half, and like debris of like big pieces of planet falling. That's kind of how I envisioned it. So I'm sure it was an incredible scene to witness if you were actually physically there in person with all those ships. But
yeah, it would just look like a bunch of death coming towards you.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, I don't know. I just the crazy thing about the story is just like how much deception there was involved to get Ender to where he was in the story. Because like basically his whole, like ever since he met Mazer Rackham, like that whole portion of the story has just been like a big lie to him, and they're just. But yeah, but the problem you have is that he wouldn't have done the things he did if he had known that these were real life battles with real people in them. And yeah, I don't know, it's crazy. You were also talking about the like the odds of the battle, and I think that could be sometimes like a good, like it can be a parallel for like maybe sometimes in the Christian life, how we think sometimes the odds are always against us, and like there's so much evil in the world, and like how can like Christianity like survive, and how can we spread the gospel whenever there's so much like hate in the world, and like, you know, there's stuff going on in Afghanistan, and there's just a lot of stuff in the world that's just bad, and it's just no good.
There's lots of brokenness, that's for sure.
Yeah, so like sometimes we can just feel like the odds are like not in our favor. May the odds be ever in your favor, from the Hunger Games. But like in the end, you know, like God's gonna have victory over the darkness and over death and over Satan, and like Satan is the ruler of this world right now, but
that's right.
There will come a time where he will be defeated and he will be destroyed for all eternity, and he'll be cast into the lake of fire, and everything will be right when the world.
He'll be tetelestai.
Yeah, there you go. Go listen to the last episode to see that reference. Yeah, but I think that's just like a good and like encouragement. Like the odds can sometimes feel like they're not in your favor, but what's that phrase? Take heart, I have overcome the world, or something. That's a quote from Jesus somewhere in one of the Gospels. I don't remember where, but
yeah, I don't remember exactly how that one goes.
Yeah. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about like the very end of the story. So the last chapter is called Speaker for the Dead, and basically what happens is at the end of the story, Ender he goes off onto some distant planet that was one of the bugger worlds, and he becomes like a colonist. I think his original intention was to go back to Earth because he just wanted to go home and be with like people again, but Valentine comes up to space to meet him, and she's like, you can't come back. Peter's going to try and use you because you're like a genius military commander, and he'll just use you to take over the world, and you'll just be like another pawn of Peter again, and you don't want that in your life. So she convinces him to stay away from Earth and just to explore the stars and to...
Yeah, and there's even like some legislation, like it's called like the Locke... Locke Accord or something like that, where it's actually better for Ender to stay up in space and not, because there's going to be a big fight over who Ender's allegiance is pledged to if he goes back to Earth, so he becomes a colonist.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know. So we get like the colonist stuff, and they're going on this planet, and he's there for a while, and there's another ship that's coming to settle on the same planet that they're on, and they ask them to go like find a new location for this settlement that they're going to have, and they come to this place on this planet that looks exactly like the scene that is in the mind game in the computer that he played with.
It's the giant's corpse.
Yeah, the giant's corpse. So it's like it's the same scene, but it's in real life, and he says that the buggers built it for him. And I don't know, maybe you're more clear on this than I was. I was kind of unclear as to how they were able to like understand, like get into his mind essentially and see what he was seeing and understand his mind.
I do have some thoughts on that. So my understanding of that is, so when Ender is with Mazer Rackham, that means he's fighting against the actual buggers. And we talked about earlier how he was having bad dreams about reliving the worst parts of his life. And he also had dreams about the buggers and them vivisecting him. So in some way, in some capacity, they had been mentally linked to Ender, and they were able to read his life, and they were able to see his memories, and they saw those memories from the mind game where he defeated the giant and it became part of the corpse. And then we didn't go into this detail, but there was like a swing set, and there's these kids that turned into wolves. And that, I mean, that has a lot of, sheep or wolves in sheep's clothing. Like, Ender has this list. He actually keeps a list of people who are, as he defines them, actually human beings in the battle school, because he feels like he's surrounded by people and he doesn't know who to trust. And that's kind of how it is in the world. Like when you're meeting people, people have track records, and, you can, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so if you've known someone for a long time, you know what to expect from them. But when you're meeting someone that you don't know, they could be dangerous. You don't know, or they could be God people, and they could be really helpful and awesome. But in this situation where he's in the battle school, he is surrounded by pride, which is Lucifer's major. The I have to have it my way, and they see threat when Ender is winning and winning and winning, and he's surrounded by these people. And that was kind of the analogy with like these kids being wolves. So he sees the giant's corpse, he sees the swing set, and then he kind of sees the tower where he fought those snakes that were like Peter, and then he goes into the tower, and that's where he finds
Yeah, he finds this mirror that I think was typically a reflection of Peter that he'd always have to look at. And there was something behind the mirror. And at first, I think he thought like maybe they lured him here to like kill him or whatever, and it was going to be like a bomb or something like that.
And he was willing to go to that. He said,
exactly. He was like, "That's fine. I
done.
deserve it." So he was willing to take that retaliation from them if that's what they wanted. But he was just basically like, "I'm just here. Whatever the buggers like have for me, like I'm gonna experience it. Or I'm gonna come and figure out what they were gonna leave.
I have earned whatever is
Yes.
here. Whatever they've left for me, I've earned it." Was kind of his approach.
Yeah. So he pulls back this mirror, and behind the mirror there is a fertilized like egg that is a queen bugger. And so I think he was basically, I don't think this is what he actually saw, but it was like in his mind he could see like what would happen in the future of like something along those lines, where he was like he could give plant the buggers somewhere and they could be prosperous and all of this stuff. And so
and one other key thing with that was he also felt that their sorrow, like they didn't know that they were.
There was like the mind link that they had there when he touched it.
Yeah, and one of the big things we didn't talk about was how Mazer Rackham defeated the bugger fleet in the second invasion. Was that he discovered that there was a central point where all tactical decisions were being made, and it turned out that was the Queen leading the invasion. And Mazer, after studying the bugger formations for so long, he attacks the one little ship that moves exactly like all the other ships, and all of the other ships just deactivate, and they are no longer thinking. Their bodies are still moving, but they no longer have a will. So that was the whole thing, is that the buggers were like these, it was a hive mind, and only queens, they were the ones that made the decision. Were the sentient minds. And so Ender gets this fertilized egg, and then what the buggers didn't realize is that they say that like each human has their own genetic future, and they said when they killed, the people on Eros, they thought they were just trimming the fingernails of the bigger, hive mind. They didn't realize that each person was in charge of their own life and their own destiny. And then when the buggers discovered that through their mental link with Ender, they felt incredibly sorry, and they said like, I wish we had just been, I wish we had been able to communicate. And Ender has wiped out their entire species, but they have left this one egg and one communication for Ender.
Yeah, and there was like a regret that he could tell from that mental link, where it was like they realized their mistake, and they weren't gonna invade a third time, but they were like, the humans they're not gonna forgive us because of what we did, and they can't blame them essentially. So they're like, this is just what we brought upon ourselves because we didn't understand. But at the same time, the humans also don't understand what they're doing, and they don't understand that they're going to be murdering the queens, and those are sentient beings as well. So like the whole war and like this whole like first contact experience between humans and the buggers was like, it was a problem of communication. And like that's such a great parallel for just like things in life. Like how many like bad situations or even murderous situations are a result of like just poor communication and people not talking and people not understanding how the other person is thinking or how the other person is feeling about a situation. And there's just a lot of times where you can be like on two completely different pages with somebody because you're not communicating properly, and that can just be like a recipe for disaster in relationships. And I think it's just such a great parallel, although the stakes are way higher in this kind of a story.
And you just saying that, I mean, we're both married, and the relationship between the husband and wife is something that constantly needs to be nurtured, and there has to be constant healthy communication. Otherwise, the relationship cannot thrive if there's, just a lot. I think you're supposed to. I've read about your emotional piggy bank, and like you constantly need to be feeding the other person. If you've heard of like the 5 love languages, like gift giving, physical contact, words of affirmation, those are ways to fill the other person's like love tank. And we are always supposed to be called to do that, and to love one another. And I think a lot of times, I even read a book that said like a lot of times people are in violent agreement. And so yes, I was reading the scenario in that book was like, this kid did something wrong and they should be punished. And both of the parents agreed on that, but they were just getting into the weeds about when the punishment should take place. Like they are both agreeing that the same thing needs to happen. But like they just lack the communication skills, one, to realize that they were agreeing about the same thing, and two, like how to reach like a compromise. I mean, we like human beings are built to be in relationships. Like that's how God designed us. That's why he's the Trinity, like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Like we are made to be in relationships. And the best way that we can be in relationships is through communications, being able to talk to one another with, as I mentioned before, truth and grace. And in a way that we can understand one another, because so much conflict happens and so much hurt happens because of bad communication, no communication, poor communication. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to improve our communication skills so that we can work towards the thing that God wants us to do. Because if you have bad communication skills and you piss off everyone you talk to, you're not living the way that God wants you to live in harmony with others.
Yep. Yeah. Good discussion. So that, like, basically towards the end of the story, in the last few pages, you have Ender, who was the one who basically genocided their whole race. He gets to find, and he gets to be the one who can speak for the dead. He can speak for the buggers, and he can tell their story and what actually happened from the first wars and the war that Ender was involved in. And so he writes this book called Speaker for the Dead, and it just tells basically the story of the buggers from their perspective. Like it's telling it as if he were writing as a bugger, and it's telling the humans who they were as people, and like what their race was all about, and all of the beauty and stuff about them. And it gets like disseminated on Earth, and I guess it says like almost every human on Earth had read the book or something. And
lots of colonists that were going to new planets had read the book.
Yep. So it just seems like it's a very encouraging story at the very end, to just like there can be a time for like a new birth and a re-coming together between these two peoples, and there can be like a new appreciation for each of them. After both races had done so much harm to the other one, now they can like come together in a way. And but Ender, he has this like queen larva egg thing, and he's basically just waiting and looking for the right place and the right time to like put it out into the world so that they can repopulate and like start a new civilization again. So I don't know, there probably has to be something where like the people of humanity have to be ready for that situation, and they have to be like ready to say, we're not gonna attack the buggers anymore. Like we're gonna be together on the same side, and we're gonna try and communicate and understand each other, and all of these different things. I'm sure like in the future books that he wrote, it deals with a little bit more of that stuff. But
yeah, I'm interested to see where that storyline goes. I'm not sure how the Speaker of the Dead, what's in that book.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'd love to read that book. I've had it for a while on my shelf, but I've just never gotten around to reading it. So, I've heard a lot of people say that that's...
Pages of light in the future.
In the future, yes. But I think he said in the introduction to this book that he originally wrote Ender's Game as like a prequel to Speaker of the Dead, which is the story that he really wanted to write. So... that just makes me really intrigued of like what he was planning to write with the Speaker of the Dead, and like Ender's Game is such a great book just by itself. So I'm just interested to see like how like does it go to a next level. I've heard it's a little bit more like philosophical and it's less like character and action kind of driven like Ender's Game was. So
sure,
it'll just be like a different tone, a different style of story. So but yeah, I'm sure it'll be just as good if we get around to reading that. So yeah, I don't know. That's basically the end of the story. Did you have any like last thoughts on just the book as a whole? And
yeah, if you haven't read Ender's Game, go out and buy it, or find some way to read it or experience it. I saw the movie. I thought the movie was pretty good. It was pretty true to the book, but I'm really glad that I read Ender's Game and then watched the movie. But yeah, if you haven't, and it's not as long as a Brandon Sanderson book. It's like
it's true. It's
nowhere
like
near the length of
a little over 200 pages.
So it's a nice like easier read. Yeah. So I would definitely recommend checking it out. I think that's what I'd like to say.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's gonna do it for this episode of the Pages of Light podcast. The next episode I think should be in 2 weeks from now, and I think that's when we're going to kick off our discussions of Dune, because the Dune movie is coming out at the end of September, I'm pretty sure. Like the last week of September is when that's supposed to come out. Hopefully it doesn't get delayed. And I've always wanted to read Dune, and so now I have an excuse to do it because the movie's coming out, because the movie looks amazing, and I want to be like ready to read that and pick out all the little Easter eggs and little things that you would find that only people who have read the book would find. I can give a plug though for a comic series that's coming out right now that is like a prequel to the Dune. It's called Dune House Atreides. It's getting released right now in comics. So if you want to get like your feet wet with Dune and you like comic books, I would check that out. It's a pretty good story. So that was actually my first introduction to Dune, so I would recommend that. So check out our website, pagesoflight.com. You can go see our blog there, and links to our YouTube and the podcast and all that stuff will be there. If you want to support the podcast, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow us on all sorts of our social media platforms. You can follow me personally on Parler at I am Tyler Thomas, or on Goodreads. And you can follow Gabe at neighborhoodnerdservices.com. And links for all of those things will be in the description, of course, so you can go click on all of those things. And you can also make sure to leave a review on your podcast app, on Apple Podcast, or wherever you're listening. And yeah, tell a friend if you've enjoyed Ender's Game and you've enjoyed these discussions on the book. So
just tell one.
Just tell one person. Everybody tell one person, and we'll double our viewership. So yeah, thanks you for any of the support you can give us. Thanks for listening. Remember to keep reading and share the gospel with somebody this week, and we will see you guys in the next episode.